Hi, folks. You're with us today, Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about doing the rounds again, the slavery grift, compensation for slavery, and people who, activists who've been scripted and given their lines and they've rehearsed them, are being sent around the talk shows and the media outlets and so on. And they're pushing their silly rationale as to why the compensation should be owed and must be paid and this sort of thing. And of course it's a racial hustle here. Black people victim, evil white Nazis are the oppressors, and so on. And once you sort of start off on this narrative, then white people bad, then it's an easy gig to go to. Then, well, white supremacy. Whites oppressing blacks, slavery, fascist, neo-Nazi, Hitler, blah, 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 blah. And then you've got that whole thing to run through. Now, most of the interviews that you see or hear about are super one-sided. The activist who comes out with absolute nonsense, tells the most terrible lies that they've been given. Most of them are too dumb to understand what they're talking about. But they come out with these terrible lies, but the media, the globalist media, don't push back. So they're able to make these terrible assertions and outrageous and ridiculous assertions. The reason why white countries are rich is because they stole everything from black people. And there's no pushback, no questioning, nothing at all. So for some people looking at this, the more simpler folks, which is, I guess, the majority, but they just, I didn't know that. Is that why white countries? Because they stole everything from black people. So these advanced technological people had to steal things from Stone Age people, and that made the technologically advanced people rich, even though the Stone Age. What? How does that work? So the simple basic questions aren't going to ask. Now I could sort of shoot all these arguments down. They are beyond absurd, and I'll go through some of them shortly. But the basic premise, they use a few basics and they shift it around as time goes on. So this year it's this argument, next year it'll be another variation on the theme, and so on. But certainly some of the recent ones that I've seen in the compensation type hustling that's going on is that, well, why are black countries poor and white countries rich? White countries, the only reason, there can be no other reason, the only reason is because the white countries stole it from the black countries. Because if in a proper world, every country would be equally rich. And therefore, because there is difference and white countries are uniquely rich, it means they fucking stole it, which means white supremacists, means Nazis, fascists, which means Hitler. So this is the thrust of it. Now, you do see it. There's just a few that maybe not push back, but at least ask some questions about it. But not many do. Even news outlets, media outlets that I would consider quite centre, and there's not many of those, they still don't really seem to take it on. They may have somebody who has an opposing view on to maybe create some sort of a debate atmosphere, but the people that ask the questions that push back are relying heavily on facts, when the people that are claiming that white countries are only rich because they stole it from black people are relying heavily on emotion and unrelated facts. Well, white people stole everything from black people. Why do you think there are so many starving little black babies in Africa? Yeah, you little baby starving. Yeah, you got a problem with that, you fucking Nazi. So they can go down that path, whereas the white person or the person arguing back, they don't have to be white, it can be anybody, would be, well, hold on a minute, the Africa was pretty much a Stone Age, Stone Age society at the time. How can you say that the white people stole wealth from Africa when you're talking about a Stone Age society? Well, what did they steal exactly? And there's just all sorts of mumbling and nonsense. But just I'll focus on one now, because this one interview where the race hustler guy, and this is a race hustle, make no mistake, and the globalists love this because it creates racial division and it breaks down social cohesion. which, if anything, is their primary aim, in as much as they can then impose the globalist project fully without any opposition. Any white person that complains about having their society torn to pieces or questions it is Hitler. Is Hitler. That's it. So, and they want to create and have been largely successful in creating that sort of overall environment. I don't know how many people actually buy it at the end of the day, but at least if you look at just the media landscape, they've been very successful in making sure this is the dominant view that's pushed right across the media spectrum. With I'd say 90 to 95% of the media is controlled by the globalists, and thus they're able to push this view pretty much unopposed, and not even questioned, let alone opposed. But I'm thinking of one race hustler now. I mean, the guy's barely literate. He's got fucking dreadlocks, and he's there. So he comes on and says, well, look, and again, he's been prepared. I don't think he even understands what he's talking about. He's just the hustle boy that's been sent out front. But he says, well, white countries are rich, black countries are poor. That means whites must have stolen it because in reality, all countries will be equally wealthy. I mean, that's an utterly absurd thing. The reason the white countries are wealthy isn't got anything to do with slavery. The reason the white countries are wealthy is because they had advanced technology, they industrialized, and they had social cohesion, and relatively minimally corrupt sort of government representing the people. So, independent courts of law, contracts and things, those type. That's why the white countries are rich, because people would invest in the future. One thing that struck me about black people, and I've hired black people, more North American black people, but who've been amongst white society for hundreds of years, but how reluctant, reluctance, maybe not even the word here, how unprepared they are to invest in the future, in any investment, whether it be to save money, whether it be to engage in meaningful education, to work hard, to try and get promotions and get ahead, to those sorts of things. They just wouldn't do it, and I didn't know why. And in spite of my encouragements, I was heavied by the board of directors to get, you got to hire some black people. Hey, Billy Bob, what are you doing? And I used to get harassed at when I had to report directly to the board, so I had to front every month or sometimes more than that to say what the state of the company was and how things were going. And they used to beat me up over not having a diverse enough workforce. And I used to say, well, look, if a black person applies and they're the most qualified people, or a brown person, I'm happy to hire them. I don't care. And I didn't. And so, but they just wanted the window dressing side of it, and they talked tough. So I ended up hiring some black people, and more just to get them out of my face or get them off my back, But I found it was impossible to get these people to live a prudent lifestyle with standards of probity in their money management and this sort of thing, and they just lived day to day, and even thinking more than a few hours ahead seemed to be too much for them. And I found that an odd way of viewing the world, because I wasn't used to. I didn't think that way. And people around me had I'd been brought up, and people around me, whether it be family members or school or work colleagues or anything like that. People just didn't think that way. They did think ahead. They did think of, what am I going to do tomorrow? Am I going to save money? And and these guys these black guys just couldn't do it. And they and even one black guy saying to me, well, if you're just, that's just a white boy way of looking at things. You say manage your money correctly and save money and this sort of thing. That's what white boys do. I do what makes me feel good. If I do what makes me feel good, how can it be bad? You white boys maybe want to deny yourself immediate and instant gratification, but why should I? I'm living. I want to have a good time. I want to feel good, and if I have to save money and not go out for dinner or something like that, or not go out clubbing, then I'm I'm not feeling good. If I'm not feeling good, why should I do it? And so on. So very much that attitude, and so So investing in the future and preparing for the future and all these sorts of things, or investing in tomorrow, thinking beyond the immediate, is what white people do. Even in Africa and various parts of the world, because I do a lot of traveling on business, and I used to do a vast amount. I used to always be in a fucking plane. I found that when it came to, say, maintenance of sophisticated equipment, all the sort of thing that you needed, if white people weren't in charge of it, it just wouldn't get done. And in Africa, say some of the big mines and so on, they're adamant you cannot leave the locals to do the maintenance. They cannot do it. And so coming back to the why are white countries rich, it's going to do with fucking slavery, or they stole money from black people. Now there are arguments today. Well, European companies, white companies are taking precious stones, diamonds and metals out of Africa, and they're not paying the full price. Well, they kind of are at the front ticket. They're not paying the full price, but they have to pay massive bribes to the corrupt African dictators. And so when you look at the cost of doing business there, no, they're more or less paying a full price. Could they pay a high price? Well, maybe, but would it go to the benefit of the people? It'll just go to the corrupt tin pot dictator. So things are this idea that the African countries only poor because white people stole it or take it, or that's absolute, utter, total nonsense. So advanced technology, social cohesion, and advanced organizational structure are what made white countries rich, and that and only that. And if you look at Japan, was quite poor until they adopted the white Western practices, and then they became rich very quickly. Very few countries have the social cohesion and the will and the incorruptibility to be able to replicate that. The African nation just cannot and have been unable to do it. So that's the reason for the imbalance of wealth. Now, the other thing these activists are saying is that, well, slavery caused rich countries to be rich. They're only rich because of slavery. But in countries that are now poor, that were or not very rich or not wealthy, then we're not interested in them. We're only interested in the rich countries that were involved in it. So if you're a rich country and have got something to take, and one of these actors saying, well, Britain's a rich country. It's the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world. So you've got plenty of money, so you can afford to pay us plenty. That's a very Marxist kind of view. You see that in divorce courts. Well, Mr. Smith, you've got a good job on good money. You can afford to give away your house. You can afford to pay out lots of alimony. You've got it, and we want it. No, we're going to take it. You can afford it. And that's very much the sort of the Marxist architecture of these arguments. You've got it, therefore we can take it. So if a country that was heavily involved in slavery is now today, very poor, and they didn't achieve anything by this, then, well, they haven't got any money. So why would we go after them? But you're saying it's a moral issue, that the slavery is a moral issue, and these people have done morally wrong. Therefore, shouldn't they be held accountable to the same standard as anyone else? Assuming you say it is a moral. Well, not really, because they don't have any money. We only want to invoke the moral argument to a rich country because they've got something we can take, and that's what we're about. Now, it just so happens the rich countries are the white Western countries that are the best managed, best organised, most cohesive, or hitherto the most cohesive. So they're most likely to be wealthy, and therefore they're the target now for the race hustlers and slavery grifters. I just want to go back and look at the wider sort of picture of slavery here. The Arabs were, this idea that white people were uniquely responsible for slavery is one argument. When that one sort of runs a little bit adrift, and they say, well, white people only got rich because of slavery. Again, that's ridiculous. Say you look at Britain as an example. The estimates for people that owned slaves are between 3,000 and 5,000 people owned slaves. Now, depending on, if you look at from the time that slavery became a thing, and this is when the plantations, whether it be tobacco or cotton or everything, were were put together in North America and sugar plantations in the Caribbean, that sort of stuff, then say the population as an average was somewhere around between 10 and 12 million people in Britain, and between 3,000 and 5,000 of them, 5,000 is the upper end of the estimates, 3,000 at the lower end. I mean, we can broker the difference, say 4,000. 24,000 people owned slaves, and they were also the owners of the bigger farms and the plantations and so on. So a very, very small number of people actually owned any slaves. And so this idea that everyone has to pay reparations is nonsense. The next argument they shift is, well, okay, so the people aren't alive today. So what happened was this vast amount of wealth was created, and through slavery, they argue, and then this wealth has been passed down. So that wealth is still in existence, and we want to get it, but every white person should pay it. What? So again, the hustle is that it's black versus white victim, white oppressor, whites must pay blacks. So they jump around in the argument. So well, only 4,000 people were doing it. Why don't we target those 4,000 people? No, because they may not be rich today. Your whole society is rich, and therefore it's white supremacy and white oppression, and so everyone has to pay because white people fascist, white people thus Nazi, thus Hitler, everyone has to pay, which of course is a ridiculous position to take. But again, they don't get challenged in the media interviews on this. You know, no one says, look, that is fucking ridiculous, you fucking moron. What a stupid thing to say. You know, they don't get that type of treatment. Instead, they get nods and go, oh, well, you know, that could be a valid point. But they just ignore any facts that dispute their talking point narrative type position. And they rely not heavily, exclusively on lies to get by. And so the facts are really irrelevant to them. Well, that doesn't matter. You know, none of that matters. We're in a moral position to make these demands. And by the way, the globalists are funding us and helping us. So there. Now, the other thing about slavery, or one of many things, was that it was blacks enslaving other blacks and selling the black slaves to the white people. Slavery was a big deal in Africa. It's a sign of status and that sort of thing. So the black slavers were enslaving other blacks and selling them to the white people on the West African coast, and then transported those slaves to the Caribbean and the Americas generally, you know, including South America. You know, Portugal was a very big player in the slave game. Now, what they failed to understand and failed to come to grips with, it was a labour issue. It was never about slavery or enslaving another individual. It was never about that. And remember, slavery has been a thing for thousands of years. The idea that it was suddenly invented or used by white people is quite absurd. Now, looking at the way the rationale works on if assuming the race hustler activist is prepared to even discuss that other people were involved. So if the black people enslaving other black people, well, that's not really slavery because it's blacks enslaving each other. So it kind of doesn't really count. Oh, all right. Well, if slavery is morally bad, isn't it morally bad whoever enslaves you? Well, not really, because it was another black person, and that's their culture to do that. What, that makes slavery okay because of that? Well, okay, all right then. Let's run with that for the moment. What about if brown people, like the Arabs, enslaved? Well, they're brown and they didn't keep the slaves because they castrated them, so there was no procreation. So the slaves aren't alive anyway, so they can't be oppressed if they're not alive. So the oppression back then kind of doesn't matter because they're not being oppressed today. And by the way, the people that took the slaves were brown, so that kind of isn't really that bad. All right, then, well, what about where black people enslaved the white people? Well, that's not really slavery because of white the white privilege, so it's kind of not really slavery because of white privilege, and that's it. What about where white people enslaved black people? Hitler, evil, fascist, Nazi, So it's very, very selective, the outrage. Why are they not outraged where there's any slavery? Then the other argument comes back, so, well, black people did enslave other black people. Okay, so we do concede some of that went on, grudgingly accepting it. But black people aren't rich today. So we're only interested in people that profitably employed slaves, that actually effectively employed them in successful commercial enterprises. We're interested in them paying compensation. People, you could have enslaved 100 times, 1,000 times more blacks, but if you fucked it all up and frittered away the wealth, or just used the black people as concubines or something, we don't really care about that. We care about it. We want to look at this through a Marxist lens of, did you actually exploit them successfully? Because if you exploited them unsuccessfully, we don't care. But if you exploited them successfully, as workers on a plantation, then we're going to say, you made wealth from that, we want some of that wealth. So it's absurdly selective and absurdly, well, it's bad if white people do it. If anyone else does it, it's not bad, or not as bad, and so on. So you could tear these people to pieces, but most of the media goes along with it. The globalist controlled media goes along with it or doesn't question it. So these absurd, ridiculous arguments are allowed to go ahead. Now, in Britain, you've got commentators like, for example, Rafe Hadel-Mankoo, that I think puts forward very persuasive arguments that the whole thing's absurd, but he doesn't really get much of a go in the media. There are only a few small pockets of media where he's allowed to express these views. And I noticed he did a speech at, I think it was Cambridge or Oxford University, where a very politically correct student body did allow him to speak. And he was constantly harassed and interjected, and there were murmurs and grumblings from the audience on the absolutely solid factual basis of his arguments. And whereas on the other side, a very emotional argument was put forward, laced with the most absurd and ridiculous lies, which was getting applause and head nods and much agreement. So we're seeing that the propaganda is really prevailing at the moment, and facts don't matter. Now, it would matter if you went to somebody who one of these social justice warriors, like white girls at university, for example, and said, okay, well, look, we're going to have to take half of your next year's income to pay compensation. Oh, no, not me. You have to get someone else to pay it. Why? Well, why? You're white. You've benefited. But no, they wouldn't agree. So it's always someone else who has to pay. And it's a bit like Margaret Thatcher's comment that the trouble with socialists is that they always run out of other people's money, which is how that works. So I just wanted to revisit this slave hustle. I can't. There is not a single utterance made by the race hustler grifters, chasing compensation. Not a single point they've raised that can't be absolutely torn to pieces by facts. But there's just nobody doing it. In a saner world, we'd have this pushback. But the globalists that are controlling and orchestrating and choreographing this race hustling with the slavery bit are also the same people that control the media, which really is the conveyor belt that pushes it out out to the public. And so until we get proper pushback on this, I don't know if the race hustlers and the grifters that are doing the rounds, again, all paid for by the globalist machine, they'll have, I think, the ascendancy in pushing their lies. You've been a taskers today at the Pushback Channel, and thank you for listening.